Sir, 202 participants are there.
Okay, no problem, because it's already, it's 3 o'clock now.
Yes, sir. You can start, sir.
Yeah, please. You remove that screen. Admin, I'm waiting for you. Yes. 2:14, we'll start.
Yes, sir.
So, good afternoon, learned participants. I know that you had a good lunch, and there is a know a sincere apology from the technical side that unfortunately the quality of the audio was poor in the morning. We try our best. We have every day we used to have a trial and run meeting where we used to test everything, but unfortunately it happened today morning. So we tender our sincere apology. So going through all your feedback, we are extremely happy. At the same time, we have responsibilities to give you the best in all the sessions. And in the afternoon, we are going to have a wonderful session. And we have fixed an eminent person, and we got to know when I was going through the feedback, and all you were appreciating the resource persons and the topics that we have chosen. And thank you from the host side. We express our sincere gratitude to you all. And we have a wonderful session in the afternoon, and to moderate this post-lunch session, we have invited an eminent professor from University of Madras, Dr. Venkatraman, who is an associate professor of English, University of Madras. Prior to this profession, he served in the Indian Express, and also he served in Orient Longman publication for 7 years. This gentleman was specialized in European literature, Russian fiction, popular fiction, poetry copy editing, and technical writing. It is my immense pleasure and honor to invite him to moderate the afternoon session. Sir Venkatraman, sir.
Good afternoon to all the participants. It's indeed a pleasure to chair this session. And also, it's my pleasure to welcome our speaker for this session, and Professor N.Elango. Now, this pandemic has actually transformed our lives. All of us know that. And on one side, you have pain, loss. On the other side, I think it has taught us life's lessons, value of life's treasures, what we are blessed with, what we should do, what we shouldn't do, the value of every moment. More than everything else, it has also taught us humility, how we should be humane. In another way, it is also this pandemic which has gathered us all together in this platform. And this pandemic has brought about changes in our thoughts as well as our actions in all spheres of life. So the pen and the pandemic, that isn't something very new. That is writing, literature, illness. They are related, interconnected, and embedded very much in history. And we have a corpus of writings and different kinds of writings when it comes to this pandemic or epidemic or illness. And for example, we have popular fiction. You have a popular fiction writer like Robin Cook, who has written Coma, Chromosome 6, Outbreak, several novels. You have Michael Palmer. So you have several such writers. And then you have non-fictional writers. Even in literature, we have the renowned Susan Sontag's work, 1978. She wrote that suffering from TB and cancer, illness as metaphor, 1978. And in that, she says that wrapping illness in metaphors silences and shames the patients. So you have a literary corpus, and it has a purpose. especially when it comes to this pandemic kind of writings. It helps us to confront and grapple with issues. More than anything else, it reveals the strength in human beings. So we have a number of writings, especially in literature. You have Love in the Time of Cholera. Pandemic writings has kind of sprouted up. And you have, I'm reminded of Jayant Mahapatra's poem, The Abandoned British Cemetery at Balsore, and also Tagore's The Old Manservant. It was written during the time of the smallpox. And these texts actually tell us something. Now, I just wanted to briefly talk a little about this poem. It is about a narrator who has a servant called Kesta. And this servant is very loyal to the family. And Kesta, the narrator's wife, keeps scolding the servant throughout. And now they undertake a pilgrimage, the narrator and the servant, because the wife says, he's more close to you, you take the servant. And then they make a pilgrimage to Vrindavan. And the master, that is the narrator, falls sick. And then it is Kesta who takes care. And then what happens, the last few lines, I'll just read that out. I recovered, this is the narrator, I recovered and was up, but he was down with fever. He took over my fatal disease, totally unconscious. He survived for 2 days and then he breathed his last. I have wanted to fire him so many times, but this time, finally, he left. After some time, finishing my pilgrimage, I returned home. And without my servant, throughout my whole life, he had been my fellow and friends. So in some way or the other, all the writings that come out of this kind of pandemic teaches us something. And this brings us to the topic that we are going to hear today, pandemic and quarantine, redrafting life and literature. It is indeed a pleasure to welcome today's speaker, Professor N.Elango, former professor and head PG and research department from the American College, Madurai. It's a double pleasure because Professor, I am from the same college. It's my alma mater. I did my UG 1983 and 1986. I passed out 1986, and the professor joined to teach there in 1987. Professor N.Elango's specialization is drama. He has published widely, and notable among them, he has written a book called a book that has been prescribed in colleges, Film Appreciation for Beginners. And he's also the official translator of the transgender activist Kalki Subramaniam. And then he has conducted more than 50 workshops on theater arts. And he has been a resource person in several workshops on eco-criticism, cultural studies, etc. And more importantly, he has directed and staged about 18 classics, out of which 9 were Shakespeare's plays, under the banner of the Fourth Wall Theatre. He is the founder director of this Fourth Wall Theatre. Professor Elango wishes to be remembered as a teacher. I think this is the greatest wish a teacher can aspire for, and it speaks so much for Professor Elango. It's indeed my pleasure to welcome all of you to this afternoon's session, and especially my special welcome to Professor Elango. Over to our professor. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. It's to have hundreds of eminent scholars in space to talk about. Is my voice audible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Is my voice audible? I'm telling you that it is a pleasure, or rather it is an honor to have hundreds of scholars and thinkers simultaneously in one virtual space to address an issue which is with us. We are not here going to stop take anything. We are living amidst the issues, the challenges that we have been facing for more than 100 days. And My choice for this topic, pandemic and quarantine, how pandemic and quarantine has these two things have demanded us. You see, these two things compel us to redraft our life and literature. And when we redraft our life and literature, what comes to us immediately is that why do we do a literature? That is a basic question. Why do we do literature? Do we do literature? Why do I say, first of all, why do we do, instead of saying, why do we write or why do we read? You see, literature is a process, and this process, both for the writer and the reader, you see, it has the same amount of impact. That is the ideal way in which the literary art, the work of art, must be perceived. So in this way, which is metaphorical, if science and areas of knowledge use a language which is rather formulaic, literature and art, they use a language which is metaphorical and dynamic. For example, see the two pictures. Since it is a workshop, I start with a kind of exercise, aspiring exercise. See these two pictures in my covered frame in my first slide alongside my name. The first, all of us know that it is the famous painting by Michelangelo. You see, it is the creation of man. But today, when you reframe it, when you edit it and take it to an extreme closer, I cannot help but notice the fissure going between the two hands, the hands of the father and the hands of the man who is there. So, is it creation, an ability, or an attempt to communicate, or is it helplessly watching the process of abandonment, the process of joy? This is the question. This is how art lives. Because below that slide, you have, my timers would remember that slide, a very famous lost shot from the film Charulada by Satyajit Ray. There is a domestic misunderstanding. And when husband and wife reunite in climax, but what happens is before these hands are joined, so even if they are reunited, are they going to live the same life? This is the question Satyajit Ray asks as the movie ends. This movie is a very important movie because that Oscar-winning director Satyajit Ray, the pride of India, when he was once asked if he were given a chance to remake all his films, what are the changes he would like to make? For which he said that I don't I would make and art, you see. So I have it in the first slide. So when we move on to question the impact of literature in our life, the impact of our life on literature, first of all, we should know what is a literature. Don't think I am getting back to a very primary issue. The scholars and thinkers would have time and again explored and came out with reviews. It is not the point. The point is, why do we do literature? You see, what do we need? What do we need literature and art for? That is a question. Because we are in the midst of struggle for survival. Maybe a few of few privileged a few privileged people of is really struggling. So do we need it literature or art? And why do we? Till now, we have been doing literature as what does literature say or how is it said? Now, the time has come for us to ask the question, why? So, what do we need? What do we need literature for? Why do we do literature? That is the question we have to ask now. We all know literature and being alone in life are very closely associated. In fact, some of us think that only by being alone one can be a creative artist. That is why during a period people used to write apologies for artists, calling them idlers, apology for idlers, or defense of poetry, and art was considered as an antonym for a life. You see, not mutually contributory as we have understood now. So, what are the various ways in which literature has been perceived and is working among us? This is the question. The first thing that comes to our mind is the divine theory. This divine theory asks the very identity of the
Professor,
creator, because this identity is not a later psychological issue as we find in Erik Erikson, who so beautifully defined the formation of identity, the importance of identity in our lives, the shaping hands of identity, you see, or life shaping one's identity. You see, this divine theory attributes
Professor,
a clairvoyant, one who has a prophetic vision. Even the very practical Shakespeare would say in Henry IV, Part 2, using deliberately Earl of Warwickshire. Shakespeare was born in Warwickshire, we all know. So deliberately using Earl of Warwickshire as his mouthpiece, he would say there is a providence, there is a history in every man's life. Knowing that the present is the product of the past, one can prophesy the future to the near exactitude, he would say. So the telegnosis, people believed that poets have the clairvoyant eye and ability to see beyond the limitations, the confines of time and space, the spatio-temporal limitations a poet can transcend, people believed. It is not just autotelic, it's also autolectic. You see, as the poet says in Mahabharata, in Vishnu Purana, Vyasaya Vishnu Rubaya, Vyasarubaya Vishnave, Namo Vai Brahmanadaye, Vasishtaya Namo Namaha. That is what the second verse of Vishnu Sahasranama says. You see, Vyasare, Vyasa, thou are in the form of Vishnu, and Vishnu, you are in the form of Vyasa. So, God, the subject matter, the poet with a Vedic vision, and the subject. You see, the poet and the subject, both these people become inseparably fused. Poet, like the writing gadget he uses, is also an instrument, just yet another instrument used by the divine muse to produce, to write, to create a product. This was a
Professor,
poem for the drowning,
Professor
Vaishnavite
Elango sir,
literature. The poem
Professor
he
Elango sir,
says by the,
hear me?
yeah, please.
Sorry to interrupt you, sir. We are in the file mode only. That slideshow is to be done. The
Slide,
presentation
okay.
slideshow. Yes, sir. Sir, in between, if your video is blocked, don't worry. You carry on with
Yeah,
your presentation.
no problem. Do you see my Do you see my file now?
Yes, sir. It is in the presentation mode. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
If your video
Did you
is
see my
off,
cover page first? Did you see my cover page first?
yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah.
It was
Go
visible.
ahead. I'm talking just about the divine theory. Can I continue with your permission?
Yes, sir. You can proceed. If your video is blocked, don't worry, sir. You can carry on with the presentation. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. So this Vedic vision, the telegnosis, is not just autolectic. This is also autolectic. This is not just autotelic. This is also autolectic. The poet and the subject he is singing both become divine. That is a concept. A.K. Ramanujan, in his excellent translation of the Vaishnavite Dravidian literature, you see, he talks about this process, you see, while translating a poem, Avan, Ivan, Uvan, you see, the poem he there, he here, and he in between. He ends the poem with a statement, with a critical statement that grammar becomes poetry. Yet the God and the poem all become one. God is the subject of. You see, in the beginning there was word. The word was God, and the word was God. People say. So like that, later came the biological theory. You see, the evolutionary theory. Man as a social and biological being. So what happens? There is an irrepressible, irresistible desire for man to share, not only for an artist, the artistic curiosity in everybody, the compulsive communicative drive in everyone. We all know that spouses share certain things which they should not share with their partner, and they get caught. You see, to such an extent, man is an irresistible sharer. So when he shares, as in the case of sophism, where he shares by convincing others, by not allowing others to get into the innermost chambers of his heart, while very much communicating and giving in those what he or she wants to give. Do you understand? Do you understand? This is a pride for man, that I can convince, like the later American dream, I can sell anything. I can sell anything. You see? Then you have the psychological theory. This psychological theory uses art, literature as a surrogate. Surrogate for what? Surrogate for reality. You see, so literature, literary sharing becomes vicarious, voyeuristic. At the same time, it is also mythical. People thought that as there is a vicarious, a voyeuristic experience in the part of the reader or the spectator, the audience, there is a kind of wish fulfillment in the many writers. Many writers would have their protagonists resembling themselves. You see, I can quote many examples. So this is a surrogate people thought. This is a wish fulfillment they thought. Only when Carl G. Jung came, he was not just a psychologist. Carl G. Jung was not just a psychologist. He was also a practicing psychiatrist. So he came across during the World War, he came across many cases who just had stopped thinking. Their minds rewind something and they replay it and they stop. They do not move forward. In fact, there was a Tamil film, Mori, in which there is a professor comes. You see, the professor, because he is not able to digest the death of his son, the premature death of his son, the professor's mind stops thinking. It stops thinking, you see. Like that, Mithridatic effect is called shell shock. You see, it can be understood as reality preparation. Reality preparation. So by reading art, by writing art, you see, by making art, by doing art, the artist as well as the one who enjoys it prepares herself, himself for facing reality. If design governs things so small, like happens to Hamlet, if that happens to whatever, if that happens to great people, the noblest of human beings, you see, the noblest of the human beings, then what will happen to me? This is the $1,000,000 question, the Mithridatic effect produced. So Carl G. Jung said, we do literature to adjust our mind to reality. From then, we started viewing art and literature also as producing Mithridatic effects. Then, in the contemporary world, as everything has become political, everything is associated, almost suffixed with the word politics, linguistic politics, gender politics, caste politics, and whatnot, and whatnot. Literature is perceived also as a propagandist medium. You see, a state or a church, a body uses, a governing body, an authority uses not only the physical force or the law enforcing authorities or constitution, they also use art and other forms to control human beings. This is the postmodern theory, how people are controlled, not only with police force and army, you see, also by artists, people are controlled. And this started, people started seriously perceiving literature with the advent of Wagner's ensemble spearheaded by Bertolt Brecht. Bertolt Brecht, in fact, he denied, he refused to call his plays as tragic dramas. He actually called his plays as epic theaters. He created an aesthetic distance, an artistic distance. He did not want his audience to undergo the vicarious, voyeuristic, or Mithridatic pleasure. He doesn't want his audience to leave the theater as pent force, as it happens in majority of cases. We laugh and cry and find a safety wall for all our pent-up emotions, the catharsis. If tragic drama revolves around catharsis, if Plato answers Aristotle, if Aristotle answers Plato, I'm sorry, if Aristotle answers Plato with the help of the weapon catharsis, safety wall, the emotional outlet is important for the healthy society. If physicians are important to keep our elements of the body well balanced in equilibrium, then we need artists to keep our emotional equilibrium to have a collective healthy society. If Aristotle argued that way, centering around cathartic theory, Brecht refused catharsis. Brecht wanted his audience to keep an aesthetic. For example, I take the fourth wall theater. You have, when the curtain is drawn, you have three walls. The fourth wall is the invisible wall that exists between the performance and the audience, which the actor tries to pull down and take on the audience into the performance. So he creates a kind of willing suspension of disbelief to give a deja vu, a nostalgia. You see, audience should willingly disbelieve. Willingly they should dismiss their disbelief. You see, they should take the theater for the locale. They should take the actors for the real characters, for the enjoyment of theater. For that, the dramatist would create an illusion of reality, a deja vu. So the fourth wall would be brought down. Fourth wall would be brought down so that the play will attain its completion. That was what catharsis aims at, whereas Brecht wanted to keep a distance, an aesthetic distance. He wanted to create an alienation effect. He wanted not his audience to participate in the action. He wanted his audience to remain as judges, not to take what is happening on the stage as reality, but rather to consider what is happening as an issue being discussed. You see, that is very important. But Brecht also concluded that after all, he needs audience to other spaces of, he moved on to other spaces of communication. You see, shall we go to the next slide?
Yes, sir.
Now, literature and being alone. At the second level, we have to understand what is created by this loneliness, what is created during this pandemic era. What do we call quarantine? Of course, there is a vast gulf of difference between isolation and quarantine. We will go to that later. But solitude is considered important, not only for artists, but also for leaders. Anyone who wants to preserve the self must have solitude at least now and then. This is very important. And so solitude stands here for sanctity of privacy. Solitude stands here for sanctity of privacy. Man, like ants and animals, like ants and elephants, man is a social animal. He wants to live in a society. But what is peculiar, rather quaintly beautiful about human being is that man is torn between two forces. One is sanctity of privacy and the other is fear of loneliness. What we have been enjoying, or we have experienced, the perfect balance between sanctity of privacy and being in the mainstream of society. The solitude, which is imperative for the solitude, which is imperative for a creative process. Self-preservation plays a very important role in our life. Whereas in the case of loneliness, loneliness is being away from others. You see, loneliness is being away from, it is rather a kind of neutral expression. There can be neither anything positive or negative about that. Need not be. Even separation, one can part against the wish, but this separation can be done by oneself, unlike isolation. whereas isolation is segregated by others. There is a social stigmatization involved in that. That is where there is a very, very demarcation between isolation and quarantine. Quarantine can be self-instructed. It need not be compulsory. For example, I can call myself in self-quarantine. Self-quarantine, self-instruct. The quarantine is speculative. This quarantine does so many things in our minds. You see, if we go for the earliest instance of literature, we can very well land on the most celebrated earliest work, that is Oedipus by Sophocles. You see, Oedipus begins with the pestilence-stricken multitude. Here is where there is a difference between epidemic and pandemic. Pandemic, as the suffix pan says, it is natural, it is universal. Pandemic is a wide range impact, whereas epidemic need not be. For example, today, Albert Camus' novel Plague sells like hot cake all over Europe. You see, it sells like hot cake. You see, people even have taken it as a vaccine, you see, to such a mad rush for the novel Plague. Plague, the novel, actually talks about an epidemic. The epidemic affects only a particular city, you see. So the city gates are down, they are locked down, you see. And in fact, Albert Camus is using the epidemic, the plague, as a metaphor for war. You see, now, in case of Oedipus, it has another very important significance. You see, the another important significance series were staged as a part of the Dionysian celebration, the harvest celebration. So what happens is that the voice of the wake, you see, when people Dionysus, you know who Dionysus is. Dionysus is the Greek alternative for the Roman god Bacchae or Bacchus, the god of wine and fertility. So this Dionysia was celebrated in honor of the god Dionysus, as we celebrate Pongal now. But unlike Pongal, which is very sacred, very hygiene and clean, you see, Dionysia always was with a drunken revelry, you see. So the voice of the wake, you see, calms down, sobers down the drunken revelry of its subjects. So it is a kind of cautioning note in the middle of a carnivalesque. You see, what is a carnivalesque? Carnivalesque is a license. Carnivalesque is a temporary allowance. You see, temporary permission given to human beings to have their base. Even unholy alliances are possible. The world can be found upside down. In a carnival, there is no spectator. Everybody is a participator. So carnival. This carnivalist creates a momentary liberation for the pent-up forces. So whatever has been suppressed for a man who has been working. So in this celebration, in this caution note, because these are the moments we will forget ourselves. These are the moments we will forget ourselves and we may drown in desires, you see, the desires which cannot be permitted, which are not healthy for a society. In fact, we must understand Oedipus is a cultural statement. There is a beautiful essay written by Claude Levi-Strauss. I want, most of us would have read, I want all of you, all the teachers here, all the thinkers here, to recommend that essay to the young minds. If we read Claude Levi-Strauss's Incest and Myth, we will understand. You see, that essay is available in the very popular volume edited by David Lodge, 20th Century Criticism. You see, it's available, easily available, very short and cute essay, very short and cute essay, and it is a thought-provoking essay, and it's a mind opener. You see, that essay, in that essay we understand that in early civilizations, primitive civilizations, they actually drove brothers and sisters out of their tribes to go to various tribes because they did not want marriage within the family, within the tribe, within the clan. So they drove them out only because in defiance when Oedipus returned. Oedipus, why his parents said maybe may have different reason, but fate, the classical concept, always talks about man as predetermined. So this fate plays a vital role. Man is predestined, and the oracle has already said, the Delphi oracle has already prophesied that this child may bring an epidemic, a pestilence, an annihilation to his city. So the child was thrown out. It was something like nemesis. You see, the child was cast away. Now, defying this destiny, Oedipus returns. So what happens? He returns to his tribe. He returns to his clan. He returns to use a modern expression, his caste. So the classical literature, what happened? What happened? He turned up, married his mother, and begetting children, for which he and his family is cursed. So the idea, the cultural statement there is, there should not be marriage inside a clan, a tribe. But ironically, today, if people wish to marry outside the caste, we kill them in the name of honor. You see how stupid it is. Definitely, the native priest would have sensed something unhygienic or something very detrimental for the clan if there is marriage within. You see, so in fact, this Oedipus Rex ought to be taken as the culture. My idea of evaluating various pieces of literature is to say how this warning, this prophesying, these experiences have been there ever since humanity evolved into a civilization. So being in quarantine, being in lockdown, we need not think that we alone are suffering. You see, in fact, the bubonic plague, which devastated Europe, Africa, and Asia, claimed 50 million lives. You see, almost 1/3 of the population of Europe was wiped out. You see, at that time, what would happen? You see, as I told you, speculating, Now it can be different. The loneliness. When I discuss all these topics, what I have in my mind is that the teachers and thinkers, when they go out, we should know that our students have been locked out of classrooms. Locked out of physical contact with their teachers, with their colleagues. So many things may have happened. Had a middle-aged man, looked bald and clad in white, clad in white. He appeared door. Slipper the astrologer. You see, so there is a touch of skepticism. All the institutions, everything is losing its impact. It's safe. In fact, Decameron records the dissident voice. You see, as carnivalist was so cleverly used by the authority for a later containment. You let them celebrate, let them carnivalize for the fixed time, because they are going to be contained later. Something like a spectator democracy, or something like what Gunter Grass speaks about in his famous poem, Do Something. You see, the government, the authorities allow, the government and authorities allow people to say like FB postings or memes, but when it goes beyond the limit for the government, they fix the limit, Immediately they will contain, they will jump into action. You see, we have witnessed so many things, so many young and thinking minds, how these people were imprisoned in the immediate past. So, whereas in the case of Decameron, it is carnivalist during confinement. So that may happen to our young ones. It is not new. Because of the disillusionment, there will be a diatribus. I am a punk. Punk means rotten wood. You see, after the two wars, Europe underwent the topsy-turvy change. You see, a pivot change. You see, the young ones who were disillusioned with the slogan shouting of their elders and authorities finally just started doing whatever their authorities, even if it is parents, even if it is school authorities, even if it is church, whatever the authority asked them to do, they did exactly opposite to that. When these people were called punks, they said, punk means rotten wood, useless fellow. They said, yes, I am a punk. I am a punk because you have made me useless because of all your sermonizing. You see, you have made me useless. So this disillusionment will end up in a diatribe of all the institutions, So instead of the language we have taught it, bawdry and ribaldry will come out as a form of rebellion. You see, decanonization will happen. You see, decanonization will happen. Decameron talks about that. When 4 young ladies and 3 young men go into a self-quarantine into an estate, and they decide that each one should tell a story every day. And all these stories are disillusionments about celibacy. Nothing is in the Roman Catholic world. That is the first today presents you in a very positive light, which was unthinkable in those days. You see, so these things we have been witnessing for quite some time. So, what are the impacts the quarantine would have to scientifically analyze them so that we can bring our students, our young ones into the mainstream, back to the mainstream, of course, after having learned to their lesson. We don't say that there should not be any introspection. We don't say there should not be any rebellion. What we mean is there a reformation? Is there reformation? So what do we identify from our young ones, including us, if we consider ourselves young, you see, or youthful, you see? Solitude. Where does this solitude come from? This solitude brings out the inherent narcissism in ourselves, the excessive self-love, you see, which could easily be seen in people taking selfies and posting them. You may ask me that, wherein their selfies before that's a kind of mushroom-like growth of this kind of narcissism, because you now have time, you are forced to look at yourself, and most of the young ones would look at their outwardly as self. And what else happens? You see, current a sense of remoteness, very much while being in the society, a kind of exotic feeling, as we find in Gothic literature, Gothic art, even in Gothic architecture. You see, we find this exotic, remote, obscure, and horrifying feeling you find in it. It may be an ordinary thing. I am not at present talking about the Freudian uncanny. I am talking even about the German Gothicism, which entered Britain and America, which you can find in what we call a very conventional poem like Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. I think the poem talks about something very exotic. But yes, of course, the poem begins, if I am right, once upon a midnight weary, while I pondered weak and weary over many a quaint and curious volumes of forgotten lore. While I sat there gently napping, suddenly there came a tapping as of someone gently. She realized this, not the solitude, this loneliness creates a Gothic experience. The death talked about, the bird talked about, his feelings talked about in the poem are all everybody is feeling. But the way in which a Gothicism is created, it becomes exotic, it becomes remote, it becomes obscure, it results in soul sickness. What begins as a play, what begins as a game to while away the time, that is what you see in Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven. You see, it begins as a game for the persona who is bored. The persona is bored. So when he sees the bird, he opens the window and lets it come in. You see, but the darkness, he interprets that as darkness entering. And finally, what happens? His bosom score is pierced by the red eyes of the raven, and his soul is there struggling in the shadows cast on the floor. You see, and he ends it with nevermore, a rote which he has learned from the bird, or the bird has started influencing the man. So the man is no more a master. So what will happen now for exoticism, for thrill? Our students, our young ones may have started, even by now, may have started playing with certain things which so many exotic things they may have started doing had they permitted a level. Because the society, what would they do? The society has put certain things forbidden. You see, totem is there, taboo is also there. You see, so you cannot play with. You see, you cannot tamper with. The taboist. The taboist. You see, they are forbidden as well as they are secret. Now, these people may tamper with that. You see, these people may tamper with that. Then everything appears uncanny. You see, the term uncanny was actually promoted by Sigmund Freud. Sigmund Freud. It came to him by Ernst Jens, you see, but Sigmund Freud deeply analyzed this uncanny. What is this uncanny? This uncanny is something familiar, is strangely here. You see, you find something familiar as here, as strange as you find in the slide. If you see the slide, you see in the slide, you see a portrait of a beautiful woman. But there are certain plague, there are certain changes. You see, a child gazing at you. You see, Shakespeare in Julius Caesar, the one of the rebels comes to tell his partners, the senators, that the previous night people have seen a lion, you see, walking in the street. You see, not strange enough, because the lion walking on the streets, the lion sees, you see, it saw the human beings, but nonchalantly or unperturbed or without any reaction, the lion just resumed its walk. You see, this is something strange. You see, this strangeness, whatever appeared to be normal, would have a slight eerie feel. In fact, I walked 20 miles during the twice 20 miles during the lockdown period. You see, the strict lockdown period without any relaxation. I walked 20 kilometers. Twice I did that. What happened was all the streets were empty, you see, except a few madmen here and there. So I felt very much at home. So I was walking there. I got this kind of ghetto feeling that somebody was watching me. In fact, at a checkpost, at a police checkpost, I even had the illusion, I even had the impression that a policeman saw me coming, walking towards him, and he turned his head away. The normal situation, the normal situation, you see, is because of angst, as Jacques Lacan would say. You see, the angst, an anxiety mixed with fear, an anxiety mixed with fear. And later on, Masahiro Mori talked about the uncanny valley. You see, he even could produce a kind of graph to say what are the spaces we get uncanny from. You see, even from toys, we can get this uncanny feeling. There are numerous horror films having toys as the ghosts, evil spirits possessing the toys. That is what uncanny is. You see, in what happens because of this uncanny feeling, a kind of abjection. Julia Kristeva says, abjection. You see, abjection is you are deprived of asserting the reality. You are not able to ascertain reality. So what happens? You start living in the illusion you get. You start taking this uncanny, this angst as the realistic situation. This would happen to proletariat, the poor, the downtrodden, you see, the minority, you see, the people who are underprivileged would have this abjection. You see, many writers have talked about that. You see, even an unexpected you can make people believe it, or people give up putting to praising or pitting reality against this promotional attitude, this kind of lie, this kind of uncanny feeling. You see, this kind of disillusion, this kind of illusion. You see, people would give up. After some time, people would give up. That is abjection. You see, but you see, this objection, on one hand, this objection will create a kind of psychological inertia. What is this psychological inertia? People refuse to see reality. You see, like megalomaniac on the other end, they are the privileged. You see, they are the privileged. You see, the powerful ones. You see, they really think that they are as powerful as they imagine themselves to be. Godlike people, godlike people, they think, and that becomes a psychological problem for them. If power is in their hands, something like racial supremacy, you see, Adolf Hitler, who was such a brilliant person, was totally convinced of Aryan supremacy. You see, even Shakespeare was not an exemption to um, a Christian supremacy. You see, he had at the bottom of his mind that as an Elizabethan, as a Renaissance writer, he had at the bottom of his heart Jews as opposed to like the Vatican vision in him, you see, make him give space even for underprivileged to pick up and argue their points. You see, that is why we call people like Shakespeare as incapable of being satirists. People like Chaucer and Shakespeare cannot be satirists, as R.J. Rees beautifully points out in his introduction to English literature. You see, the writer, the historian, the critic says Chaucer and Shakespeare are incapable of becoming primary satirists because the primary satirist should have an inherent hatred in his mind, in her mind towards something, you see, which Shakespeare and Chaucer are incapable of. So Shakespeare, you see, even though he is a philanthropic writer, he's an open-minded man, the genius in him allowed women and other suppressed people, Jews, racially suppressed people, and people like Othello, Moods. He has given them space for later generations to pick up and argue, as Wilson Knight did in his tour of Europe. You see, on a tour of Shakespeare's lecture, where he pointed out Shylock's argument, if you prick us, do we not bleed? If you tickle us, do we not laugh? If you offend us, do we not revenge? You see, for suffer Shakespeare tour around Europe after the world wars. And since people were the atrocities committed, the Holocaust unleashed, you see, the annihilation, mass annihilation, the racial annihilation, the genocide committed by the majority on the minority, the Jews, still it was lingering in the minds of the Europeans, white Europeans. So they could understand what Shakespeare should have meant in his plays as Wilson Knight highlighted them. You see, or else Shakespeare too was a slave to this Renaissance majority thought. You see, because there is a psychological inertia. You see, that no one is exempted to the feeling of fear and submissiveness towards majority. Even, you see, even Jean-Paul Sartre, who remained a rebel like Albert Camus throughout his life, you see, he said at a point he was an atheist. Jean-Paul Sartre was an atheist. So his existentialism was based on this atheist philosophy. Whereas when you come to the absurdist Albert Camus, God did not come to his purview at all. You see, that is where existentialism and the absurd part with each other. You see, Jean-Paul Sartre once said that I am not afraid of God. What I am afraid of rather is the collective faith of humanity. So the fear of the majority, it causes the psychological inertia. So what do? We are not able to cope with reality. Because reality cannot bear very much reality, he would say. You see, like that, there is a kind of status quo bias. You see, you don't want to go out of it. You see, you just live. You see, if Emily Dickinson would have said it in a very positive way, you see, the soul selects her own society and closes the door. This status quo bias, this psychological inertia, on the other hand, is negative, is detrimental. You see, as David Gall and Derek Rucker researched and found out using hundreds of samples, case studies, you see, they called it psychological inertia. You see, don't want to move, you just stay as you are, giving up, giving up. You see, amidst all these things, you see, I wish the teachers and the thinkers here, the elders here, to recommend the reading of Dalai Lama's, Dalai Lama's, a research on Dalai Lama. You see, a research on Dalai Lama by Albert Curtis. You see, the art of happiness, the art of happiness. You see, it is a research on Dalai Lama. This American psychiatrist, this American, I will give it in the reference section. I have the reference in the last, so don't worry, just follow me. You see, the art of happiness, the art of joy, the art of living was an experiment, was a research this American psychiatrist did by accompanying Dalai Lama for a long time. You see, Dalai Lama, because he was a psychiatrist, he found something, just the elevator. He would say something to the elevated boy. Immediately, the elevated boy would boom into a smile. You see, you wouldn't even know what Dalai Lama said. It would be a long speech or a great joke cracked. He would just say something. You see, the very next day, When the elevator opened, there were so many people, scores of people waiting to meet Dalai Lama. And Dalai Lama, the puny man with his bent hunchback, he just walked, he just passed through, waded through, forded through the crowd, nodding at every individual and saying something. And the entire crowd started smiling, blossoming with smile. This psychiatrist couldn't understand how could it be possible. In the final pages of the book, he asked Dalai Lama. You see, the book is even available in Tamil translation in Madras and Padipakam. The book is very low price edition. You see, both in English and in Tamil, it's a low price edition. It's available for 200 or rupees in Tamil edition, and some 300 rupees it is available in English edition. You see, so what happens here? He asked Dalai Lama, you see, how could you make this? Is what we also want to do. The psychiatrists want to do. When people come to us with depression, calling themselves a failure, we treat them, you see. But we find it very difficult. Have you ever lost? He asked Dalai Lama. Dalai Lama too says, yes, I too have failed in my attempts. I too have failed. What would you feel then? You see, I would feel sad. And I would walk off. I would move on. I would move on. Then he caused by disappointment. Disappointment is resultant of expectations. So only when you expect something, you see, it's a very quizzical thing. It's not that we should not have expectations, but if we have expectations, we should be ready for disappointments, because expectations are from our part. You see, so Dalai Lama says, if you have expectations, sometimes there may be disappointments. And if there is disappointment, that will lead to depression. What you find in Shakespeare's Hamlet, you see, what begins as a realistic physical loss, the loss of the father, the loss of mother's love, becomes emotion. Hamlet becomes melancholic. This melancholy, which is prolonged, results in soul sickness. He loses faith. That is why there is an emancipation in the final part of the play, when Hamlet says there is a special providence in the fall of a sparrow. The leap of faith, you see, he takes. We can be atheist. The leap of faith does not need always the rocket of God. You see, even Vivekananda would say simultaneously, you should have faith in yourself as you have faith in God. Faith in yourself, faith in God. So it's not mandatory that one should go to temple. In fact, during the lockdown period, temples were locked down. You see, colleges were locked down. You see, all the institutions where we would turn generally for solace, for respite, for counsel, for help. Narayana Samarpayami. A Vaishnavite would find salvation in surrender. All these places were locked down. But what happened ultimately? Humanity realized that it is going to be all by itself, at least physically. You see? So we turned and started listening to certain voices, whether they are from the elders or they are from the doctors, because we had this primitive wisdom. We had this primitive wisdom. Later on, in the name of modernity, in the name of modernism, capitalism entered, industrialization entered, and while they were making the so-called progress, they were killing this primitive wisdom, or they were pillaging this primitive wisdom, and started converting them into their products to be sold. The primitive wisdom has always insisted upon personal hygiene, individual discipline, you see, immunity. That was primitive wisdom. Today, this pandemic period has taught us ultimate personal hygiene. Herd immunity comes next. You see, unless you have immunity in yourself, how herd immunity will be possible? You see, that has come to us. Read the statement our chief minister has given day before yesterday. He has clearly stated that they cannot prolong days. Now people are left on their own. You have to take care of yourself, he said. You see, so this personal emancipation, Dalai Lama points out these expectations, you see, mostly lead to, because they are from your part. They are your wish fulfillments. You see, you don't check with others, what can you offer me? You see, you always demand that this I expect from you. So most of the times that may result in disappointment, and this disappointment may cause depression. And this depression, you see, as Nassim Ezekiel would say, beautifully state in one of his poems, corrupted by the society, I must infect the society with my corruption. You see, corrupted by the society. I must infect the world, I must infect it with my corruption. What happens? This disappointment results in aggressive behavior, results in violence. You see, as long as we have companions, we have peer groups, they can guide us. But in the quarantine period, as pandemic has shut down all the possibilities, what can we do? We are left on our own self. So this is how we must be. So I want all the teachers, you see, all those who are here to take some of the points Dalai Lama makes, you see, very important points, you see. If you can do away with expectations, or if you are ready to, in spite of your expectations, if you are ready to take the reality as the other, as individual. The other person is not your mirror image. Even the first knowledge told us that even our mother was not our mirror image. So how can the other person be? So the quarantine tells us so many things. It teaches us so many things. And there is one thing when talking about um, when talking about this uh, quarantine experiences, I just a few days back I came across uh, a clipping from a webinar conducted by an athlete. You see, the webinar conducted by the Squash Rackets Federation of India. You see, and there was a, there was a uh, there was a news item on that in the Hindu dated July 2. You see, the webinar was the resource person of the webinar was Harinder Pal Singh Sandhu. You see, who was 2014 gold medalist, Asian gold medalist in squash, and he was hurt this January and broke his backbone, and he recuperated from that, you see, and he gives us certain recommendations. Very interesting, you see. He talks about the decision, the focus in mind. The focus should be to get back to your swing. And when we reawakening, when we return to the you find in the experience inside a theater, after having watched a tragic drama, it may have started with the exposition in the same plane. At some point, there is a point of attack, a plot point, and the action gets gyrated. And what happens? It reaches a climax. And in the climax, you have the struggle and conflict having reached its penultimate pinnacle. You see, then there is disaster, devastation, catastrophe, and there is a fall. And when the play ends, you see, when the play ends, it does not end as it has started. You cannot have the graph drawn in equal measure. You see, rising action, falling action. You see, after having fallen, the protagonist, after the protagonist has fallen, both for the protagonist and for the audience, there is an emancipation. You see, the graph ends and he is emancipated from the level with which he started. Even Victorian novels are not exemption to that. You read, if you have read Silas Marner, you will understand Silas Marner begins as a good and innocent person and he returns to his village. But when he returns to his village as an old man, having traveled the journey of life, the exodus of life, what happens is he seems to have returned to the same point, but it is not so. Like the wedding guest of Samuel Taylor Coleridge's ancient, you see, like that, after having lived this life, you see, the question is, are we going to consider the present scenario as the new normal? You see, the tragedies we have read, you see, the denouement we have seen, the open ending which has left with us, have not told us to just accept the new normal. Being adaptable, I think I am making sense here. Being adaptable to a situation, being flexible and spontaneous, you see, doesn't mean that you're compromising. You're compromising. Instead of the physical contact, instead of the physical presence of the student, here the students are virtually present, the listeners, audience are virtually present. We perform, we teach. You see, the mode, the medium may have changed, not our passion, not our intention. Just because we are in a distance, we are at a distance, you don't compromise in our teaching. So this athlete beautifully states, it's not that only writers are clairvoyant. The athletes are also clairvoyant. The athletes are also Vedic, you see, because they have lived their life. They have lived the moment, you see. So here Sidhu says, the focus should be to get back to your swing. We must get back. We have bent. Of course, Hemingway has taught us, if you do not bend before nature, nature will break you. Hemingway has told us, you see, unlike Ahab of Herman Melville, who challenges, if the sun blocks my way, I will kick him out of his way. Hemingway says, you see, that's a beautiful couplet in classical Tamil audience. I'm not talking that is in Tamil. A treatise. It's a socio-ethical treatise. It is a secular treatise. Nowhere he makes strong references. Of course, here and there are certain references to the so-called Hindu gods, but not any strong insistence of Hindu way of Hindu faith or Hindu way of life. In the book I am quoting now, that is by the classical Tamil poet Thirumalai. His compilation of 1,330 couplets in the form of Thirukural. And at one point, he talks about the reed in the middle of water. When the flood comes, the reeds wait, you see, stand together and resist. Because if they resist, they may break, they may be overflow. So the reeds bend and give way for the water to flow. But what we should understand is it's like a boomerang. The reeds later, after the water flow, the reeds they get back to their original position. So we are not going to accept anything as a new normal. You see, we are not going to accept this pandemic experience as a new normal. We know our elders have written it. That is why I deliberately chose a text from classical Greek literature, and then I moved on to Renaissance, Italian literature, and not so Albert Camus is bold enough, you see, to open his most famous, the most philosophical work, the collection of essays, Myth of Sisyphus, with the statement, the most important question today, philosophical question today, is that of suicide. Why people commit suicide? This is the question he asks. He says there are two types of people. Some people say yes to life, some people say no to life. The funny thing is, only those who say yes to life commit suicide, he points out. And why does it happen? And we are reminded of Dalai Lama, who says, only when you have uncompromising expectations, you see, something like a status quo bias, you see, a psychological inertia, which does not allow you to adjust, to call a spade, then you will say, this is my expectation, this or nothing. Then when you are disappointed, you become depressed. Either you commit suicide or you become a murderer. You see, or you behave aggressively. But here, the focus is we compromise, we are flexible, we are adaptable, which does not mean we are compromising. Our elders have told us. So the focus should be to get back to your swing. We are not going to accept the compromised situation as a new normal, as a new normal. Of course, what we have learned from this quarantine experience, from this lockdown experience, our eyes were opened. You see, there are so many inevitable. We were not ready when our elders said, you see, but now without them, you see, we would have gone to gutters, you see, without the sanitary workers. We would have gone to gutters. Those whom we would have been treating as untouchables were the saviors today, you see. So these lessons we would carry, you see, and the sacrifices of the doctors, you see, the beautiful character in Albert Camus' Plague, you see, who even when he has a chance to leave, the doctor doesn't leave. He even loses his wife there in the other city who was also sick. He had a chance to leave. He doesn't leave. He was about to leave, but then he calls it common decency. You see, beautiful expression in Tamil, in English translation, common decency, not to abandon the society. So we will get back to our swing, for which we need plan, structured, strength-based training. For example, now if we have 5 units, we can reduce them to 4 units, you see, and attention should be paid even to minor details, you see, as I have told you. That's why deliberately I used the expression example from Edgar Allan Poe, The Raven. You see, the whole poem can be read, you see, because the poem which started as once upon, as an exotic experience, is actually very much dated. All right, all right. Can I take 1 more minute? Just 1 more minute.
Yes, sir. Kindly, I think we can wind in a minute or so, sir. Please, sir. Hello. Hello.
Okay. So we have to build. Remember, we should all remember that there are 6
Hello, Professor Elango.
In India alone, 300 million. Hello?
Yes, Professor Elango. Could we finish in about a minute or so, sir?
Yeah. Just 1 minute.
Thank you,
1 minute.
Thank you.
You see, in India alone, 300 million students have been locked out of school. Their accessibility standards are very low, not even 50%. So, but all these people, you see, all these people have average watching of the media, you see, 3.45 minutes a day, you see, so 400 billion hours per day. So we have to use the modern media, you see, with the use of subtitling, same language subtitling, or whatsoever. We have to use multimedia and other things to keep the interest of the students sustained. You see, thanks for the great opportunity. You see, since it is very much contemporary, I was so involved in that, so I may have barged into the question, or I don't know. But thanks for this opportunity, which allowed me to simply say, of course, with apology to Albert Camus, there should be more things, there will be more things to admire in human beings than to despise. Thanks for this opportunity. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Professor, for your...
Thanks for your patience. Thanks
Yeah.
for your patience.
Thank you, Professor. Am I audible?
Yeah, very much audible, very much audible.
Yeah. We have a number of questions, but due to lack of time, we would just go into a few of the questions, Professor. Most of them seem to have, even including me, we were expecting something
Sure.
regarding certain texts. So
yes,
we have a question.
Your voice there is a jerk in your voice. That's a lapse in the audio. Sir,
hello?
please.
Yes. Am I audible now, sir?
Yeah, now audible.
Yes. We would like to know. Hello.
Yes.
We would like to know the role of literature, literary works especially, because the literary text affects the readers in a negative way. So some works. Hello.
Sir, Venkatraman.
Yes.
Solunga sir.
Sir, koncham and the mic koncham thalli vecheenga.
There is a rupture in the
Yes.
Now the audio is very clear.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So most of the participants, at least most of them, want to know the role of literary works in this present pandemic, which is very, very important. And because some of the works have a negative impact. So
some of the roles
want to know the role and significance of literature or literary works, and how the literary works can help during this kind of a difficult period, and the positive aspect of these texts. That was another question. So could you just address this question, sir? The role and significance of literary texts, which can go both ways.
The role played by the literary text in coping with the present scenario.
Yes, present.
Am I right?
Such difficult times, have a negative effect.
Difficult times. In what way?
Yes,
because the question is very much an important question, because I think, or I may be imagining. I think the question asks, we are now worried about our survival. We are now worried about our bread. There is an economic crisis. There is no job, and you are talking about it.
Can you tell us, cite some literary texts?
You are talking about Shakespeare, you see. So that kind of the ray of that kind, the shade of meaning I find in this question. Remember, not just because I am a teacher of language and literature, I tell you this. You see, sensibilities. What is more and the most important thing for humanity to survive in paradise or in pandemic? You see, wherever we are, we may be in heaven, or we may be in hell. We may be in prosperity, or we may be suffering in pandemic situations. But sensibilities alone can make humanity survive. Again, I can quote from a literary writer. You see, William Faulkner, in his Nobel Prize acceptance speech, you see, has pointed out that humanity can survive, humanity will provide only because it is capable of compassion. You see, we have been witnessing that literature is the only tool which can, art and literature, of course, literature and art are the only tools we have to sustain these finer sensibilities in this world. If we do not have art and literature, definitely humanity will not prevail. So we need literature only in these trying moments. You see, they should remind us of the finer sensibilities we have. Have I answered the question?
Uh, Sir, I have also a question for you. You spoke about carnivalesque, Bakhtin's carnivalesque. Hello, Professor Ilago.
Yes, the questioner.
Yeah, hello,
Just a
Professor.
minute. Yes, an extension of my answer. As an extension of my answer. If the questioner expects me to recommend a few literary works, I may be an old timer, but still, in my period, short works like Jonathan Livingston Seagull by Richard Bach, and Fountainhead by Ayn Rand, um, and many of Shakespeare's works, you see, they inspired us. I'm using English text, I'm quoting English text alone, you see, or else the classical Tamil Changam poetry, which is available in English translation, excellent translation, will throw such a good light upon human life and humanity sustaining its beauty of living among nature. So the books which I have changed. For example, I quoted the book Albert Camus' Myth of Sisyphus. It is such a wonderful book. It is such a thought-provoking book which will give you a perspective of life. You see, and Dalai Lama, of course. Dalai Lama. You see, a book on Dalai Lama as Art of Happiness is an excellent book. Read Shakespeare. Read Shakespeare. You see, Shakespeare is such a treasure house of optimism and advices, very practical advices, practicable advices.
Thank you, Professor. I like to just extend Professor Elango's points. This pandemic, there is no other go. No, it is a kind of a flow, and we cannot stop the flow. Neither can we jump into it. We just have to go with the flow, and it does have a negative impact, I'm sure, especially on youngsters. And one wonderful way of using the lockdown and this particular period is by reading. And one of you have raised a question about texts.
Yes.
Now,
yes.
There are different, when you say quarantine, it is also a kind of an isolation. I'm reminded of the Holocaust. This is also some kind of a Holocaust, I would say. So a work like Anne Frank's diary, or
Anne Frank's diary,
Gulag Archipelago by the Russian writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn, or to be more specific with regard to disease, you have hospital poems by Arun Kolatkar. He was diagnosed with cancer, and then he is in the hospital, and he comes up with a number of poems. And one remarkable poem is The Crab. So you have a description about the crab. He is helpless, he is lying there, and the crab comes closer and closer to him. And then ultimately he says, it is going to eat me. And then later when we realize it, he is talking about cancer. So you have a number of works, especially now, pandemic writings have come about, and you have even Shobha Day writing short stories, and you have really a plethora of works. Yes. I have one question for you, Professor Elago. You said quarantine. Do you think there is a subtext of power politics in this quarantine?
Yes. Sir, before
Carnival, you said carnivalesque.
Your question.
No, I think this being in quarantine, take all that is fine. But there is a subtext of power politics
I
that
should
functions.
add, and certain poems may leave us more depressed when we read the sufferings of others. I'm not talking about using literature as an escapism. That's not. There are certain works which, as I quoted William Faulkner, Albert Camus, Plague. He talks about, you see, he talks about humanity will rise, humanity will rise, humanity will come up. So such books can be read. Such books can be read. Now to Sir's question. Sir's question: is there politics? If you are talking about current politics, maybe the organizers can put a disclaimer here that the points made by the points made by the speaker belong to him and not to us. You can do. I think you need a separate webinar for that. I think that so many aspects of this pandemic quarantine experience we are undergoing are all tailored. Tailored. You see, uh, when we compare this this mutant virus with bubonic plague or other things, it is not as serious as that. And I'm sorry, there is much politics about that. You see, the English medicine's pathology is having a field day. You see, for example, yesterday, I have even the recording of that. Yesterday, I heard the audio recording of a patient, just vitamin tablets and this kapsulaquinine and all. But for each person, they have charged 30,000 rupees. 30 for 3 days. For 3 days, they have charged 30,000. It has become a roaring business. So many things are involved in that. Some people, you're like in the wartime, there are war businessmen. You have arms sellers who will never stop the world respiting from war. You see, there are people. There's a beautiful movie, Babel, titled Babel, as a warning to this armed trade, especially to America. So, like that, this pandemic scenario is not just something pathological alone. It is very much political. And about quarantine, this quarantine, keeping people inside, you see, is like carnivalesque. Is like carnivalesque. It is indirectly telling them that you must be controlled. You can be controlled. You can be controlled. So there is, of course, I can speak, but I don't think this forum is the right space to discuss candidly, also due to the lack of time. Lack of time. This is a liberal thinking forum, I know, but the subject is focused on something different. The pandemic, the quarantine is very political. You see, it's very political. It's not just pathological. The experiences we are undergoing. Long back, people have told that herd immunity and personal hygiene alone can be a solution. But we took 100 days to come to that point. To come to that point.
Thank you, Professor. I wish you would see the chat box. Many comments that it was an excellent presentation and a very neat presentation. Thank you so much, sir. Dr. Ramasabu.
Quarantine. Answer.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Tell me, sir. Yes. Fine, sir. Fine, sir. Fine, sir. Fine, sir. So, Dr. Ramasabu, can we close the session?
Yes, sir. Please, what are things?
Yeah. Thank you. It was wonderful. I thank the organizers and I thank our speaker, Professor N.Elango, for this wonderful session. Thank you also all the participants for being with us throughout. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Elango. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And participants, dear learned participants, there is an announcement from the host side that you all know well that Sikimbuzo Mangadi, the head Department of English of Johannesburg University, South Africa, and he is going to address us on Sunday afternoon. We have received few articles and we have been asked to circulate it to the participants. We will send you mail, and also we'll send you this when we'll circulate it in the WhatsApp groups and Telegram. Please, that's a request from the speaker. You please go through it, go through all the articles before you come and attend the session. And probably we'll share it today evening. And if any queries, clarifications, you please post it to the mail ID which is given to you in the browser. Thank you so much. Have a good day. We'll see you tomorrow morning by 10:50. Thank you so much.